But let's begin with Jeff Paul, who's monitoring what's happening at the border. He's in our West Coast newsroom. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Eric. Yeah, we've been watching what's happening at the San Ysidro port of entry. At one point, there appeared to be a few hundred demonstrators in Mexico marching closer and closer to the border, getting right up to the fence that separates the two countries. The Associated Press is reporting tear gas was fired from the U.S. side at migrants after some tried to breach the fence separating the U.S. and Mexico. But it appears most of that group of the caravan has dispersed and moved along. Now, we should mention there have been demonstrations on both sides of the border today, both in the U.S. and in Mexico. Organizers saying this is supposed to be a very peaceful demonstration, and U.S. Customs and Border Patrol says it's been aware of these marches and demonstrations and says that it stands ready to respond.
We expect that it will be a peaceful demonstration, but nevertheless, we will remain prepared for any contingency that might present itself. I think it's important for me to point out for your viewers and for yourselves that this caravan and this phenomenon and how it's manifested itself is absolutely unique to anything that we had seen in the past.
Now, as you take a look at these live images of the border in Tijuana, the mayor there has continually called this a humanitarian crisis, asking all sorts of organizations for help. But with nearly 5,000 migrants from Central America already in that area, it's likely only to get worse with more on the way. The migrants who have made that journey from Central America, though, are trying to remain hopeful.
Well, I'm very stressed because the truth is, this situation is not pleasant, but I'm always in hope of having a positive response from the U.S. authorities.
Now, these marches come just a day after U.S. Customs and Border Protection reported that Border Patrol agents in the Yuma sector had rocks thrown at them from someone who was part of that migrant caravan. Eric?
Yeah, notable how critical the mayor of Tijuana is about that caravan. Jeff Paul, thanks very much. Arthel?
And Eric, thank you. Meanwhile, the incoming Mexican government denying reports it has reached a deal with the Trump administration that would let asylum seekers wait on the Mexican side of the border while their cases are processed through our courts. All this as President Trump threatens to shut down all border crossings with Mexico. Iowa Republican Senator Joni Ernst says she could get behind that idea.
Let's work really hard to make sure we're addressing the asylum seekers before they actually come over the border. I think that's the intent of the president, is to divert any issues before they actually happen. So, of course, we don't want to see the border closed. But you know what? Safety of our nation comes first.
Let's go to Brian Yennis. He is now in West Palm Beach, Florida, close to where the president has been spending his holiday weekend. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Arthel. Well, look, it's unclear what exactly the president means when he says he's going to shut down the entire border between Mexico and the United States. Does that mean all 26 legal crossings? Does that mean it also affects trade? We simply don't know. But nonetheless, President Trump continues to make this threat that he will shut down the border unless there is some type of solution to that migrant caravan crisis at the border. Earlier today, actually last night, the president tweeted this, quote, "Migrants at the southern border will not be allowed into the United States until their claims are individually approved in court. We only will allow those who come into our country legally. Other than that, our very strong policy is catch and detain. No releasing into the U.S. All will stay in Mexico. If for any reason it becomes necessary, we will close our southern border. There is no way that the United States will, after decades of abuse, put up with this costly and dangerous situation anymore." Now, this tweet with these ideas comes after the Washington Post first reported yesterday that Mexico's newly elected President Andrés Obrador and President Trump came to an agreement on a plan that forces all immigrants seeking asylum in the United States to wait in Mexico while their cases are being processed in U.S. courts. It's a process that could take anywhere from 2 to 5 years even. The Post quoted Mexico's incoming Minister of the Interior, but today that same minister says there is no asylum deal. Quote, "There is no agreement of any sort between the incoming Mexican government and the U.S. government." So I guess stay tuned. But nonetheless, if this agreement were to be made, it would replace the catch and release policy that the president has continuously railed against, in which immigrants are let go into the United States while their asylum cases go through U.S. courts. The president blames this catch and release policy on Democrats. He says it incentivizes these migrants to come illegally. Democrats say, though, the current crisis is on the president.
He controls the White House. His party controls the House and the Senate, and it is on them. What I think that they should do, George, is first of all, he should have been working with these Central American countries a long time ago.
The Trump administration has long targeted the so-called Flores Agreement. They want to change the asylum process, and by doing that, they need to sidestep that Flores Agreement, which states by law that immigrant children can't be detained for more than 20 days. The Trump administration has made it clear that they would like to detain these families while their cases go through U.S. courts. Arthel?
Brian Yenes, thank you, Brian. Eric?
Although there's some new reaction from top Democrats to President Trump's appointment of Matthew Whitaker as acting attorney general. You know, the incoming chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Adam Schiff, well, he says the panel needs to know if Whitaker was appointed to shut down special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia probe. You know, Whitaker has been critical of that investigation, and Congressman Schiff charges the acting AG, he says, is not being transparent with Congress.
We are going to bring Whitaker before the Congress, assuming he's still in his position at the time when Democrats take over. We may bring him in whether he's in that position or not to find out the answers to these questions.
And what will Whitaker say? Garrett Tenney with more on this from Washington. Hi, Garrett.
Hey, Eric. In addition to shutting down Mueller's probe altogether, lawmakers are concerned about the other steps that Matt Whitaker could take to either hamper the investigation or to try and keep Mueller's final report from going public. That's why Democrats and a number of Republicans are pushing for legislation that will protect the special counsel. Here's Senator Amy Klobuchar, who sits on the Judiciary Committee, which has oversight of the Justice Department.
I think we should do everything we can to try to negotiate to get that bill passed, because this is about the rule of law. We'll see what our leverage points are, but there is some Republican support for this. And all of my colleagues who have said repeatedly that they want to protect this investigation really have to come forward and do it.
President Trump had been talking about firing Jeff Sessions for more than a year before it happened, so Mueller certainly knew that it was a possibility or even likely that a new attorney general would be appointed before he was done with his work. On ABC's This Week, Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz said Mueller has likely been planning and preparing for this very situation.
I think Mueller purposely got all of his work done before the midterms because he wanted to make sure he was finished with all of his work. That's why I think he accepted the written statements. He didn't want the new attorney general or acting attorney general to be able to interfere, and it would be politically a disaster if the new attorney general did that.
We may learn about some new developments in Mueller's case tomorrow. Last week, prosecutors asked for a brief delay in a status hearing for former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort, who has been cooperating in the Russia investigation. They didn't explain why they needed that delay, but said tomorrow the two sides will submit a report that will be of greater assistance to the court. Now, Eric, that could be any number of things, but it is certainly something that we'll be keeping an eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. Garrett, thank you. Arthel?
Yeah.
NASA's InSight spacecraft is almost at Mars. Yeah, it's due to attempt a landing tomorrow after a 6-month journey to the Red Planet for some in-depth research. Jackie Heinrich is live in New York City with more on this historic mission. Hey, Jackie.
Hey, Arthel. There are thousands of steps from the point of launch to the point of landing, but 7 months of work will culminate in a nail-biting 6 minutes, including a period of free fall that has NASA scientists very nervous. If all goes to plan, the InSight mission will kick off a 2-year study of Mars's deep interior. While we know a lot about the surface, atmosphere, and ionosphere of Mars, little is known about its core. InSight will measure quakes and temperature to try to answer questions about the differences between Earth and the Red Planet.
What it really helps us understand is how we got to where we are today, how we got to an Earth that has an atmosphere which is breathable, an environment which is in a temperature range which is comfortable for life, how we have a planet that's covered with water.
But before all this can begin, there are a number of hurdles to get through. The cruise stage separates from the aeroshell. Then InSight has to stick the landing at a very shallow angle so it doesn't burn up or bounce off. At 10 miles above the surface, the parachute launches, the heat shield falls off, and landing radar sends pulses to the surface to measure speed and also distance. Then the vehicle has to rotate out of the way so the parachute and the back shell don't fall on it, using rockets to steady the landing.
What an exciting day. I mean, I almost can't wait. I'm really excited to go land this thing.
Landing on Mars is never a foregone conclusion, and less than half of the times we've tried to either get into orbit or land on Mars, we have not been successful.
When InSight lands around 3 p.m. Eastern on Monday, viewers are expected to gather in watch parties across the country, but you can also watch it live from your home. NASA will be broadcasting the whole thing online. Arthel?
Fascinating. Jackie, thank you.
Thanks.
Well, meanwhile, back here on Earth, California, the deadliest wildfire ever, while 159 people remain unaccounted for. Crews are continuing the grim task of sifting through the debris for human remains following several days of rain there. The fire broke out on November 8th and spread across 240 square miles and destroyed thousands of buildings and practically wiped out the whole town of Paradise.
Mexico's government denying reports it reached a deal with the U.S. to keep asylum seekers in Mexico while their cases are being processed here. This coming as more critics push back against the policy here at home. Here's the top Democrat on the House Oversight Committee, Elijah Cummings, this morning.
That's not the law. They should be allowed to come in, seek asylum. That's the law. And we don't.
Would you support changing the law?
No. No, I think that we have a system that has worked for a long time. This president has come in, wants to change it. That's up to him. But now the Congress has got to stand up.
Let's bring in James Carafano, senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation. First of all, what do you think? Do you think the current system works?
Of course it doesn't work. Human traffickers have gamed the system. They figured out that you bundle people as a family, you bring them to the border, you get in, and they abscond. Essentially in the Obama years, the president basically put out a welcome sign. He was basically coaching human traffickers on how to bring people here. So people are literally gaming the system. Look, I've had analysts at the caravan. Most of these people aren't even economic migrants. They're just people that think if they get here, they can get a better job. The vast majority of these people will not qualify for an asylum claim.
Why would the Mexican government say there is a tentative deal on the table only to deny it all the next day? What do you think is going on?
Well, look, this government is outgoing. The deal would be with the incoming government.
Yeah, and that's who's denying it, the incoming government.
And they cannot make a deal before they're a government. I mean, they just can't. So, of course, they can't say, oh, yeah, we made a deal, because legally they just cannot do that. The incoming government has every reason to want to cooperate with the United States. First of all, when you shut down border crossings, that really tees Mexicans off. People come over, they work here, it's a problem for them. And they don't blame Trump, they blame the migrants. And if this migrant convoy works, there'll be more and more and more. And that's just as big a problem, if not a bigger problem for Mexico than it's the United States. You can better believe that the incoming administration, they don't want this to become a recurring thing.
So then, the president tweeting that it would be smart for Mexico to do its part to hold asylum seekers on the Mexican side of the border, until they're already processed here in the U.S. So you think that this is a pretty good arrangement, or do you? And you just laid out what you think what's in it for Mexico, particularly President-elect Obrador.
Yeah, I think eventually the Mexicans will make a deal because they see it in their interest. Because what they see is this is a massive deterrent. Thousands of people are not going to want to sit around in Mexico waiting for entry to the United States, knowing that their claims will almost certainly not be verified and they won't be allowed in. So it's going to kill the whole strategy of the caravan. So you bet I think the Mexicans would be up for it.
Now you do, I don't know if you read this, but I did, that some of the businesses in Mexico actually have jobs for some of the migrants, saying, yeah, we could actually put you to work in some of our factories.
That's not what they came for, but if that's what they want to do and Mexico wants to accept them, that's Mexico's business.
Well, wait a minute, if that's not what they came for, what do you think they are there for? Just to get to the U.S.? I mean, is it to get to the U.S. for a better life, which would be a job there in Mexico instead, or help me figure out where you're going with this?
Well, see, I think they would think that a job in the United States or the benefits in the United States are far better than Mexico, so Mexico would not be the preferred destination. But remember, an asylum claim is based on credible risk. In other words, that you specifically fear that you and your family's life is in danger. That's not what's going on here. And these aren't even economic migrants. They're not people saying, oh, I can't find a job, so I'm just trying to find a job anywhere, because they can find jobs in their own country and they can find jobs in Mexico. They think it's just a better deal to come to the United States. And in some cases, it's not their fault, because there are human traffickers out there. There are other people out there that are telling them, come to the United States. This has been something that's built up for 8 years under Obama, where rather than creating deterrence to illegal migration, essentially we've been pointing the way on how to game the system.
So, James, I want to get to 2 more questions if I can before the segment's over. Will this remain in Mexico policy ever take effect, albeit it's supposed to be a short-term deal?
I believe when the government comes in, it would be in their best interest to do that. And I believe it would be a short-term thing because once people realize that the tactic of coming in the United States and then doing catch and release doesn't work, it'll significantly reduce the likelihood of people wanting to do that.
So it's almost like a virtual wall. Let's take this to D.C. Will the president shut down the government over funding for his physical border wall? I mean, is the president walking a negotiating tightrope on this one?
I just don't know the answer to that. Some of what the president's doing, I think, is kind of a deterrent value. Just saying these things, I think, hoping to scare people away from the border. So, for example, saying, I'm going to shut down the border. Well, look, the caravans can't be on 1,000 miles of border, and they can't be at 26 border crossings simultaneously. But where we have seen this administration shut down crossings where people have tried to cross. And I think if you see the deterrent effect, then I think it's absolutely decentivizing more people wanting to come.
But would Congress let the president shut down the border?
I think well, it's a good question. I think the president has authority to actually shut down border crossings. I don't think that's up for question. The question is will there be some kind of compromise in the border wall funding? Look, I think this is becoming a really insolvable problem. I mean, we are faced with 2 options: either control the border or have open borders. And I'm not sure either political party wants it to be shaped exactly that clearly, because I don't think that's a winning strategy for people just to say the option is just an open border.
So you just said that Republicans and Democrats alike don't want an open border. That's what you just said.
Well, I mean, that's what
you just said.
Well,
and that's
yeah,
a good thing, because if they can compromise and get together on this, we can help solve this issue.
That's right, but because otherwise, I mean, I think that's what you're faced. You're faced with. You have to be the party that's for open borders, and I'm not so sure that that's a big win.
Okay.
So I do think there could be a compromise here.
Thanks, James Carafano. Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care.
Well, Arthel, Iran is at it again when it comes to us, despite the nuclear deal. The shocking new call from Iran's President Hassan Rouhani to Muslim nations about America and what prompted it. And we have a very special preview of my Fox Nation News special, Riddle, the search for James R. Hoffa. What happened? Who killed him? And why?
Jimmy Hoffa is missing.
I mean, Jimmy Hoffa is missing. This place went absolutely wild.
How many shots were fired at Jimmy? 2.
Frank Sharon told me that he killed Jimmy Hoffa. That after President Trump reimposed the last set of sanctions on Iran that had been lifted as part of the Obama-era nuclear deal. Trey Yeks is live in Jerusalem with the very latest, and he certainly did not mince words when it comes to Israel, too. Hi, Trey.
Eric, over the weekend, these comments by Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, the latest in a series of verbal attacks. This time, though, you're right, he did not mince words at all here. Speaking Saturday at the annual Islamic Unity Conference, Rouhani accused the United States of cultivating close relationships with regional Muslim nations in order to protect and support Israel. The Iranian president calling on Muslims to oppose the United States, saying it would be treason to their religion to agree with America and the West. The Iranian leader even going as far as to call the country of Saudi Arabia a brother and say that Iran is prepared to protect the interests of its people. Currently, Iran and Saudi Arabia are supporting opposite sides of ground conflicts in both Yemen and Syria. Rouhani's comments come just weeks after the Trump administration reimposed sanctions on the Iranian regime that had been removed under the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. In addition to the United States, Israel was a target for Rouhani during his remarks in Tehran, where he called the country cancerous. Take a listen to what the Iranian president had to say.
How was a fake regime called Israel formed in the region, and how the great and historic nation of Palestine was displaced from its home and has been subject to slaughter, plundering, and oppression of the Zionist regime in the region for many years.
Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did respond to those remarks by Rouhani over the weekend, calling Iran a murderous regime. As for the United States, I did speak last week with a senior Trump administration official who indicated that the major foreign policy issue when it comes to a mutual alliance between Israel and the United States is pushing back against Iranian aggression. Eric?
All right, Trey. Thanks so much. Arthel?
Well, Eric, thank you. European leaders giving the Brexit plan a green light, but now comes the hard part for British Prime Minister Theresa May, winning support from her own parliament.
Before Christmas, MPs will vote on this deal. It will be one of the most significant votes that Parliament has held for many years. On it will depend whether we move forward together into a brighter future or open the door to yet more division and uncertainty.
Alison Barber has more now from Washington.
Arthel, Prime Minister Theresa May is urging the British Parliament to sign off on the Brexit agreement that was reached by the European Union and the United Kingdom. Both May and the European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker say this is the only possible deal.
If people think somehow there's another negotiation to be done, that's not the case. This is the deal. It's the result of what has been tough and difficult negotiations over a significant period of time.
The European Union will not change its fundamental position when it comes to this issue.
In Brussels, 27 EU leaders agreed to endorse the withdrawal agreement and political declaration. The deal lays out the terms of the UK's European Union departure. It also takes into account the framework for the UK-EU relationship moving forward and what's described as the common objective of a close future relationship. But this deal is not final. Next, the British Parliament and the European Parliament will vote on the deal. May says the British Parliament will vote sometime before Christmas after a, quote, crucial national debate. But the future of this deal in the UK is still so far from certain. It faces opposition from those who do not support leaving the EU and those who do.
This draft agreement fails her own key commitments. The Prime Minister has not been able to guarantee an outcome that eliminates the risk of the introduction of the so-called backstop arrangements.
This deal risks further economic and political humiliation.
The United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland are set to leave the EU by March 29th. This EU-UK agreement includes a transition period. Arthel?
Alison Barber, thank you. Eric?
We're now to our new special on Jimmy Hoffa that premieres on our new streaming service, Fox Nation, on Tuesday. The show is called Riddle, the search for James R. Hoffa, and it investigates the most infamous disappearance in American history, and it reports what we found. You know, in 2004, we went to this house in Detroit after a confessed mafia hitman and Teamsters local president, Frank Sheeran, told me he killed Jimmy Hoffa in that house. Hoffa thought he was going to a sit-down with mob bosses. So to try and find evidence of the crime, you can see it there. We took the floor up, and guess what we found? Blood, in the exact pattern that fits Sheeran's story precisely. The greatest amount was by the front closet door where Sheeran says he shot Hoffa in the head. 7 drops trailing down the hallway to where he said 2 mob accomplices dragged Hoffa's lifeless body to the kitchen, wrapped it in a body bag, and he believed that it was then cremated when they drove away. The FBI tested the drops. 28 were positive for the possible presence of blood. DNA only recovered from 2. One matched an unknown male. The other was inconclusive. I met Sheeran as part of his proposed biography that became the best-selling book, I Heard You Paint Houses. Frank, the Irishman Sheeran, and closing the case on Jimmy Hoffa. There is the book, and there is its author, my dear friend, Sheeran's former attorney, Charlie Brandt, who joins us now. And Charlie, it's good to have you back at our table here at Fox News.
Great to be here, Eric.
17 years ago, I met you that day in 2001. Sheeran says how he shot Hoffa. I said, where's the house?
Hired a D.C. consulting firm with Republican ties to plant negative stories about its competitors and critics. We're back with Dan Henninger, James Freeman, and Wall Street Journal editorial board member and Facebook follower, Alicia Finley. So, Alicia, why is the press and the media suddenly so hard on Facebook?
I don't know if this is actually suddenly all year that they've been attacking Facebook, partly because of the news that Facebook or Russian agents used Facebook to promote fake news and disinformation that may have benefited Donald Trump in the 2006. No, I think Russians spent about $100,000 to make 3,000 ads. That did not in any way determine the outcome of the election, or even probably influence it.
Just a drop in the ocean of all the media coverage in 2016. Now, what about these recent management problems?
Well, I think what we're seeing, or what we are now reading about, is that Mark Zuckerberg really doesn't have control over his company. And Cheryl's, in terms of, he doesn't know what's going on. He even said that, like, how do you expect me to know what's going on in a company with 10,000 employees? I can't, right? And he claims that he was unaware that they had hired this PR firm in D.C. to push back against critics. I wouldn't really call it an opposition research firm that, as the left does, but he was unaware that they had hired it.
And you're arguing that given the political stakes here, this is something that a CEO should certainly have a handle on.
I think that's exactly right. And certainly his chief operating officer, Sheryl Sandberg, who was brought in to basically manage PR.
Our colleague, Holman Jenkins, Dan, says that Facebook is a scapegoat for the Russian election, for Donald Trump's victory.
Well, yeah, and I think Holman also said that Facebook is essentially a scapegoat for all the problems of society now. And you know what? He's
James will agree with that.
I think Mark Zuckerberg himself said earlier this year, when you connect more than 2 billion people, that's the number of Facebook people, you're going to see the good and bad of humanity. Well, that's right. And you know what Facebook's revenue was last year? Over $40 billion. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg with Facebook basically captured the sun. He's got the whole world, coming onto Facebook, making all of this revenue. That's all they do now. And now he's got to figure out a way to management. It is not clear to me, Paul, that this company is indeed manageable because they want him to be in charge of fake news. They want to be in charge of trolling content and so forth. Yeah, all the bad of humanity does show up on social media. And how is Mark Zuckerberg supposed to control all that?
Well, they want to profit from content that they get, good and bad, including high quality content from the Wall Street Journal. But they don't want to pay for any of that content or take responsibility for it.
Well, that would suggest the business model's working pretty well. And maybe Mark Zuckerberg is onto something here.
Well, but it cannot last, I think, is Dan's point.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think part of it is this anger on the left that they haven't embraced the Russia collusion theory to Facebook's great credit. They're kind of acknowledging it now in an effort to improve PR relations, but they shouldn't. They should continue to point out that it really didn't affect the outcome in 2016. As far as their business model generally, they have had a phenomenal run by having all of us trade our personal data to them in exchange for free services, which obviously many people around the planet enjoy. So I think consumers ought to be very skeptical of any Washington deal that tries to rein in Facebook, whether on privacy or anything else. It's probably going to end up being great for Facebook and not so good for potential competitors to them.
What about the content differentiation? I mean, do they have to start to behave more like a publisher?
Well, I think the question is if the government is going to force them to, because I think they're really loath to do that because they don't want to have to make decisions whether something is quote unquote fake or misinformation versus real or conveying actual news. Partly that is going to unleash criticism that they are censoring, which they don't want. But on the other hand, they're going to invite public or political scrutiny if they don't.
Democrat Maxine Waters claiming it amounts to the destruction of civil rights protections for students, and former Vice President Joe Biden saying it would return us to the days when schools swept rape and assault under the rug. So what exactly is DeVos proposing? Wall Street Journal editorial page writer Jillian Melchior is here. Jillian, you follow this. What are the key proposals?
So I think the most important thing is that every single campus hearing about sexual assault or harassment is going to have cross-examination now. And that's really important because you want adjudicators to be able to ask hard questions, to be able to view the demeanor of somebody as they're making an assessment about credibility.
And that was frowned on before under the old Obama guidelines.
It was viewed as something that would subject a victim to re-traumatization. But again, this is really important, and I think we're seeing through the entire Title IX reform a focus on due process, a focus on truth-finding.
Title IX being the law that applies here to education, schools that get federal funding.
Exactly.
Okay, so cross-examination, there was a Sixth Circuit court, a federal appellate court ruling saying it was required in the case of the University of Michigan. So DeVos, in that sense, is really just following court precedent.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's been several Title IX John Doe cases brought by students who said that they were accused of sexual assault and then deprived of their right to an education without due process. So I think this is something that we're seeing increasingly work its way up through the courts.
One thing she didn't change, though, is the preponderance of evidence standard, which is usually means basically more than 50% or more, 51% proof that something happened. She didn't go to a clear and convincing standard, which is sometimes used in courts, much less a beyond a reasonable doubt standard. Why?
Well, so preponderance is the standard used in civil cases, and the argument there is that you have all these other due process protections, so it's sometimes okay. But even with this reform, we're not seeing all of the due process protections. I think that this was a compromise move to try to get some of her cross-examination, evidence rules, other things through. This was the bone that she threw to